The air was thick with tension, as the elegant garden buzzed with the hum of muted conversations. Rows of pristine white chairs lined the manicured lawn, the scent of roses and jasmine weaving through the warm afternoon breeze. Guests in designer dresses and tailored suits clinked champagne glasses, their laughter polished but guarded. Everything about the scene screamed perfection, except for one thing. A man stood alone near the edge of the crowd, his posture straight, his confidence unshaken. His charcoal gray suit fit him like a glove, his polished shoes catching the golden light of the setting sun. But no matter how impeccable his appearance, he couldn't blend in. Not here. Not in a crowd where every glance seemed to question his presence. "Who does he think he is?" someone whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Across the lawn, the bride's mother tightened her grip on her glass, her eyes narrowing as she whispered furiously to her husband, "This is a wedding, not some charity gala. What is he doing here?" The man didn't flinch, didn't react, even as the weight of their judgment pressed down on him. He knew their assumptions. He'd seen this before. But tonight, their carefully constructed world of privilege and prejudice was about to crack. Because this man wasn't just a guest. He was someone they'd never expected. Someone whose presence would upend their assumptions in ways they couldn't foresee. Jordan Miles was the kind of man who left an impression wherever he went. Standing at 6 feet tall with a commanding presence, his deep brown eyes carried both warmth and an undeniable spark of determination. At 33, Jordan was a self-made success, a skilled corporate lawyer with a reputation for taking on cases others shied away from. He'd built his career brick by brick, his work ethic shaped by a childhood where opportunities were few and far between. Raised in the heart of Chicago by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Jordan learned the value of perseverance early on. His mother always said, "You don't let the world define you, Jordan. You define yourself." It was advice he carried with him whether he was navigating grueling law school or long hours at the prestigious firm where he now worked. Despite his demanding schedule, Jordan always made time for people who mattered. Chief among them was Andrew Clark, his college roommate turned lifelong friend. Their friendship was an unlikely one. Jordan, the ambitious scholarship student, Andrew, the carefree heir to a family fortune. But their bond was unshakable, forged in late-night study sessions and shared struggles. Andrew's world couldn't have been more different from Jordan's. While Jordan built his life from the ground up, Andrew had inherited his. He belonged to a family of old money and influence, their name etched into Chicago's social fabric for generations. Yet their friendship endured, grounded in mutual respect and a shared sense of loyalty. So when Jordan received an invitation to Andrew's wedding, he felt a swell of pride. Andrew had often spoken about his fiancée Elizabeth Windsor, a woman from a similarly wealthy and influential family. The wedding was set to be an opulent affair, held at Elizabeth's family estate, a sprawling vineyard nestled in California's wine country. The invitation promised elegance, charm, and exclusivity, but Jordan approached it with practicality. He didn't care for he was there for Andrew. Still, he couldn't ignore the underlying tension he felt as he packed his suitcase. He was no stranger to walking into spaces where people judged him before he even spoke. The vineyard estate was breathtaking, with rows of grapevines stretching to the horizon and a grand manor house standing sentinel at the center. The scene was idyllic, but beneath the surface, there was an unspoken hierarchy, a rigid social order Jordan would soon find himself clashing against. This wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a stage for wealth and status, where every glance, every word, carried layers of implication. Jordan didn't yet know the challenges ahead, but he carried himself with quiet confidence, prepared for whatever the evening might bring. Jordan arrived at the estate dressed impeccably in a tailored charcoal suit, the kind that blended sophistication with understated elegance. He stepped out of his rental car and handed his invitation to the valet with a polite nod. The young man took the card, hesitating for a fraction of a second before pasting on a professional smile. "Welcome, sir," the valet said, his voice overly formal, almost stiff. Jordan noticed the quick glance down at his shoes, then back up again, as if silently questioning his presence. Jordan shrugged it off, This wasn't the first time he'd been underestimated. The grand entrance to the estate was alive with chatter and laughter. Guests in designer gowns and tuxedos milled about, sipping champagne as a string quartet played softly in the background. Jordan navigated the crowd with confidence, but he couldn't ignore the subtle shifts in energy as he passed. "Excuse me," a woman in a sapphire gown said, stepping slightly away from him as though he had invaded her space. She leaned toward her companion, her voice low but just audible enough. "Do you think he's with the staff?" Jordan stopped at the reception desk, where an attendant in a crisp black suit greeted him with a polite but guarded smile. "Name, please." The man smiled. "Jordan Miles," he replied, handing over his invitation. The attendant scanned the list, her brow furrowing slightly. I don't see your name here. Are you sure you're on the guest list?" "Uh-huh." Jordan's patience flickered. "I'm positive. Andrew Clark is the groom. He personally invited me. Maybe check again?" Her tone remained professional but edged toward dismissive. "I'll have to verify with the event coordinator. Please wait here." As Jordan stepped aside, he noticed other guests breezing past without even being asked for their names. It wasn't lost on him how the ease of their entry contrasted sharply with the scrutiny he faced. A few minutes later, the coordinator arrived, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. She eyed Jordan, her gaze lingering a beat too long. "Mr. Miles, is it? We weren't expecting any additional guests from Andrew's side." Jordan's jaw tightened. "I'm not an additional guest. I'm his best friend. Look, I don't know what the issue is, but I'd appreciate it if you stop making me feel like I don't belong here." The coordinator's cheeks flushed. "Of course, Mr. Miles. My apologies. You're free to join the event." But the damage was done. As Jordan walked into the main reception area, he could feel eyes on him, the whispers following like a shadow. At dinner, the seating arrangement seemed deliberately isolating. Jordan was placed at a table far from Andrew and Elizabeth, surrounded by older guests who offered polite but strained conversation. "So," an elderly man at the table began, his tone dripping with condescension. "What do you do, Mr. Miles?" "I'm a corporate lawyer," Jordan replied evenly, taking a sip of water. The man raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's impressive. Must have been quite a journey to get there." Jordan forced a smile. He was used to these backhanded compliments, the ones that carried an undercurrent of surprise, like his success was some kind of anomaly. The evening escalated further during the toasts. Margaret Windsor, the bride's mother, took the microphone, her tone polished but icy. She began with glowing praise for Elizabeth and Andrew, recounting their shared values, their perfect compatibility, their impeccable backgrounds. "And of course," Margaret added, her gaze sweeping the room, "we're so grateful to everyone here tonight. Family, close friends, and special guests. It's truly a joy to see how far our circle has expanded." The emphasis on special guests felt like a dagger aimed directly at Jordan. His grip tightened around his glass, but he kept his expression neutral. When the formalities concluded, Andrew finally found Jordan, pulling him into a firm hug. "There you are. I've been looking for you all night. Are you enjoying yourself?" Jordan hesitated, debating whether to share the microaggressions he'd been enduring. "It's an impressive event," he said instead, deflecting. Andrew's grin faltered slightly. "Something wrong?" Before Jordan could answer, Margaret appeared, her voice sharp. "Andrew, darling, there you are. We need you for a photo with the Windsor side of the family." She turned to Jordan, her smile thin and forced. "Thank you for coming. It's lovely to see such diversity in our little gathering." Andrew stiffened. "Mom, what's that supposed to mean?" Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm simply saying it's wonderful to see how welcoming we are." Jordan finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. "I've noticed that people here are very observant of my presence." Margaret's smile faltered. "Well, you must understand, Jordan. This is a very close-knit group. It's natural for people to be curious about someone who's, well, not from our usual circles." Andrew's face darkened. "Mom, Jordan isn't some outsider. He's my best friend. He's been there for me more than anyone else in this room." Margaret's lips pursed. "Andrew, let's not make a scene." But the scene had already been made. Guests nearby were whispering, their curiosity now fully piqued. Andrew turned to Jordan, his voice laced with frustration. "Jordan, I'm sorry. This isn't how I wanted tonight to go." Jordan shook his head, his composure unbroken. "It's not your fault, Andrew, but I think it's clear that some people here weren't ready for me to be part of your life." The tension in the room reached a boiling point. Margaret's dismissive attitude wasn't just about Jordan, it was a reflection of deeper, systemic biases. Jordan realized that this wasn't just about one night or one family, it was a microcosm of the broader struggles he'd faced his entire life. Being judged, dismissed, and underestimated simply for existing in spaces he was told weren't meant for him. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a battleground for identity, respect, and belonging, and Jordan knew he couldn't stay silent any longer. The evening's tension came to a head during the final toast of the night. Guests had gathered around the towering fountain at the center of the estate. The air buzzed with polite laughter and the clinking of glasses. But Jordan could feel the weight of the unspoken judgment pressing against him. Margaret Windsor took the microphone once again, her poise immaculate as she addressed the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate not just a marriage, but the joining of two families with shared values and legacies. It's a union built on tradition, respect, and the kind of excellence we've always upheld." Her eyes swept the crowd and landed on Jordan, her expression neutral but calculating. "And to those who join us from outside these traditions, we welcome you as observers to our way of life. It's important to remember how hard we've worked to preserve what makes us who we are." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Subtle, but undeniable. Jordan felt Andrew tense beside him, his face betraying anger. But before Andrew could say anything, Jordan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Excuse me, Mrs. Windsor," Jordan said, his tone cutting through the murmurs. "I couldn't help but notice the emphasis on tradition and exclusivity. It's a beautiful sentiment, but I wonder, does that tradition include respect for everyone, or just the people who fit a certain mold?" The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning toward Jordan. Margaret's smile didn't waver, but there was steel behind her gaze. "Mr. Miles," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "it's wonderful to hear you share your perspective, but you must understand this evening is about family and certain values are deeply rooted." Jordan stepped closer, his posture straight, his presence commanding. "I understand values, Mrs. Windsor. I was raised by a mother who taught me that respect and fairness aren't reserved for certain people. They're universal. What I don't understand is why a celebration of love has to come with subtle reminders of who doesn't belong." The murmurs grew louder, a mix of surprise and discomfort spreading through the crowd. Margaret's composed mask began to crack. "I think you're misunderstanding the context here, Mr. Miles. My comments weren't directed at anyone specifically." Jordan's expression didn't waver. "Context matters, Mrs. Windsor, and so does intention. But let's be honest, it's not about what you said. It's about what your actions and words imply. From the moment I arrived, I've been met with questions, scrutiny, and dismissiveness. And I have to wonder, how many other people have walked into spaces like this only to feel the same cold welcome because they didn't look the part?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Andrew stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mom, Jordan is my best friend. He's family to me. If anyone here doesn't see that, then maybe they're the ones who don't belong." Margaret's face flushed. "Andrew, this isn't the time." "No," Andrew interrupted, his tone sharp. "It is the time. I've stayed silent long enough. Jordan has been there for me through everything, more than anyone else here. And if anyone can't accept him, then they don't understand what this marriage is about." 3. A wave of quiet support came from the crowd as some guests nodded or murmured in agreement. Even Elizabeth, standing beside Andrew, placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke up. "Jordan has my respect, Mrs. Windsor, and I'm ashamed that he hasn't felt welcome tonight. This isn't the kind of family I want to be a part of." Margaret was visibly shaken, but Jordan's voice softened, carrying a quiet strength. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here because I believe in Andrew and Elizabeth, in the love they're building together. That's what tonight is supposed to be about. Unity, not division. But if we're going to talk about values, then let's make sure those values include respect, equality, and the courage to challenge old traditions that no longer serve us. The silence was deafening for a moment before one of the guests broke it with tentative applause. Then another. Soon, the clapping grew louder, a small but powerful wave of support. Margaret looked around, realizing she was losing control of the room. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she stepped back, handing the microphone to Andrew. Andrew turned to Jordan, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jordan, for being here, for standing your ground, and for reminding us what really matters." Jordan nodded, a mix of exhaustion and relief washing over him. He hadn't planned to confront anyone tonight, but he'd spoken the truth. And the truth had resonated. As the evening continued, the atmosphere shifted. Guests who had once been hesitant now approached Jordan with apologies or expressions of support. Andrew and Elizabeth made it a point to keep Jordan by their side, ensuring he felt like the integral part of their lives that he was. For Jordan, it wasn't just about that night. It was a reminder of the power of standing up, not just for himself, but for the countless others who faced the same unspoken barriers. It was a small victory in a much larger fight for respect and equality, and it was a moment he would carry with him long after the lights of the estate faded into the night. As the evening wound down, the atmosphere at the estate shifted. Margaret Windsor, though visibly uncomfortable, extended a curt but formal apology to Jordan, acknowledging her missteps. "I may have underestimated you," she said, her voice tight but laced with a grudging respect. Jordan accepted the apology, not with bitterness, but with the dignity that had defined his actions all night. The ripple effects of Jordan's confrontation were immediate. Guests who had previously kept their distance now approached him, engaging in genuine conversation. An older couple expressed regret, admitting that his words had made them reconsider their assumptions. Elizabeth's father, who had remained largely silent throughout the night, pulled Jordan aside. "You've given us all something to think about," he said, his tone thoughtful. "It takes courage to speak truth in a room that isn't ready to hear it." By the next morning, whispers of the night's events had spread beyond the estate. Andrew and Elizabeth made a public statement through their wedding website, praising Jordan for his integrity and condemning the biases that had surfaced during their celebration. The couple pledged to use their platform to advocate for inclusion and equality, turning their wedding's moment of tension into a broader call for reflection and action. For Jordan, the experience was transformative. While he hadn't set out to challenge the status quo that night, he left the event with a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his voice carried weight, not just in boardrooms or courtrooms, but in the everyday spaces where prejudice quietly thrived. More than just a wedding guest, Jordan became a symbol of resilience and truth, a reminder that change often starts with one person daring to speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. And that courage, he knew, would inspire others to follow suit. Jordan's story is a powerful reminder that silence only upholds the status quo, while courage, no matter how uncomfortable, can ignite change. In a world where prejudice often hides behind traditions or subtle actions, speaking up becomes an act of defiance and hope. His actions at the wedding were more than a personal stand. They were a call for accountability. How many of us have been in situations where we've witnessed or experienced bias, but stayed silent? How often do we avoid difficult conversations to preserve comfort at the cost of justice? Jordan's story challenges us to reflect and act. Let this moment inspire us all. If you've faced similar experiences or have stories of courage to share, we'd love to hear them in the comments. What can we learn from these moments? And how can we ensure we're building a world where inclusion and respect are the norms, not exceptions? The truth is, change doesn't come from institutions. It starts with individuals, like you and me, choosing to challenge inequality wherever we find it. So, will you stand up when the moment calls? Let us know your thoughts below.